What's up, Story Geeks? It's Jay.
And Daryl.
On today's show, we're going to dig deeper into Ready Player One, asking where does this film fit in Steven Spielberg's legendary canon? What has actually happened to Halliday at the end of Ready Player One? And what were his motivations throughout the film? And also, why do our stories spend so much time questioning escapism and virtual worlds versus the real world?
That's right. And joining us on today's show, we have returning guest and big Steven Spielberg fan, Helen O'Hara from the Empire podcast. We got the chance to talk to Helen previously about Captain America, and it's so exciting to have her back on the show, especially to talk about Spielberg, which is so near and dear to her heart.
Absolutely. And we'd also love to talk to you about Spielberg, so please share your thoughts on Ready Player One or any of Steven Spielberg's movies in the Story Geeks Facebook group. The link to our Facebook group is in the show notes. Also, don't miss our Aftercast. Daryl and I dig a little deeper into human consciousness and how it relates to our favorite stories. We also talk about our favorite movies that have virtual worlds.
And be sure you don't miss our upcoming shows. Next week, we're going to be doing a special Dig Deeper episode into the concept of anti-heroes. That's the tie into Venom. And then if you want to go back a week and check out what we've been doing, we did a really fun episode where we made Green Lantern better with Scott Nicewander from NerdSync. That episode is super fun. And if you're not a patron, let me just go ahead and throw out a quick little plug here to subscribe to Patreon, because that Aftercast was really fun too.
Yeah, that Aftercast was probably one of my favorite Aftercasts of all time. Yeah. Super thankful that Scott was able to join us for that one too. Thanks for listening in. The Story Geeks podcast is produced by the Reclamation Society. Let's dig deeper into Ready Player One.
All right, first thing we want to do is welcome our very exciting guest today. Returning to the show, we're so excited to have her back, is Helen O'Hara from the Empire podcast. Welcome, Helen.
Hello, how you doing?
We are doing great.
Yeah, doing pretty good.
So awesome. I just finished, well, not finished, I'm still listening to it, but I was listening to your guys' live podcast from yesterday. So
wait, has Chris put that up already? That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's really funny.
Oh, good.
I saw that James had posted that they were going to have to edit a bunch of it out. And then someone was saying, like, no, just leave it all in. I'm like, just leave it all in. We don't want to hear it all.
I literally got a message from Chris this morning going, you know that bit we thought we might edit out? I'm leaving it in. It's funny, and I don't think we'll get complaints. So
I think I might know which part that is. There's some beeps, but it seems like everything's there. So
fingers crossed.
Exactly. Well, we are here to talk about Ready Player One today. Really quickly before we do that, Helen, just go ahead and let everybody know where they can find the Empire podcast and where they can find you and all that good stuff.
Right, so I am on Twitter at Helen L. O'Hara. I'm the editor-at-large for Empire, which means I'm kind of a minister with our portfolio. I kind of do stuff there and then go off and do other things. So, but a lot of my writing is in Empire. You can find it Empire Magazine in, I think, big Barnes and Noble in the States, right? And
yep.
And then also we're online, empireonline.com, and that's where you'll find links to our podcast, which is weekly. We discuss the big new movies every week, and then we do spoiler specials for the really big movies whenever those come out. So and those are always quite a lot of fun.
And some of them are 6 hours long and super fun.
Just that one is 6 hours long. But in fairness, that's Chris McQuarrie's fault and not ours. So
he's so fascinating, though.
He's
so
amazing.
Fun to listen to.
He's amazing. Yeah.
Daryl told me about it. He told me about the first one.
Yeah.
And I go, okay, well, I'll listen to that someday. And then the second one came out, and I started listening to it. And I'm like, now I'm enthralled. Now I have to go back and listen to the other one.
Go back and listen to Rogue Nation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have never had. I keep getting compliments from people we interview on that one. If they've listened to the podcast, that's the one that all the filmmakers talk about. So, because I think they're fascinated that someone was that honest about the process.
Totally.
And again, this is credit to Chris McQuarrie and not to us. So I feel like I can say that without being immodest.
Yeah, it's like listening to the best director's commentary there is.
He's
cool.
He's pretty awesome.
Super cool.
Okay, well, let's talk about Ready Player One. So, first of all, let's just take a quick pulse on this and see how we feel about Ready Player One, how we think it holds up against the rest of Spielberg's work. I think we have some differing opinions here. So, Helen, why don't you kick us off on that one?
Okay, well, I'm a huge Spielberg fan,
yes.
And indeed Spielberg apologist. I would put AI among my top films without qualification. I think I was trying to do that, 5 films that sum you up as a person thing that was going around Twitter recently.
Yeah.
I didn't actually publish mine, but Lincoln, I found myself writing Lincoln, and I don't even quite understand why, but I love that film, and obviously like all the old amazing ones, all the old undisputed classics. I'm a huge fan of. So yeah, I'm a dyed in the wool Spielberg fangirl. I want to say this because I didn't love Ready Player One. I didn't mind it, and I thought it was a major step up from the book, but it is not among my top 20 Spielbergs. He's made more than 20 films, I feel like, right? Yeah, he's made a lot
for
more.
sure.
Yeah. So
in fact, I'm
so
on IMDb, and I can tell you how many he's directed.
Thank you.
His producer list is so long and stuff. 58.
Oh, I know.
58 films he's directed.
Whoa.
Wow.
I would
That
not
must
even
include
guess that.
TV as well.
Probably,
Yeah.
and maybe some shorts early in the career or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
But yeah.
Jay, what do you think, Jay? Where does this one hold up?
So I actually am going to kind of mirror what Helen just said, because I was a little disappointed in the film. My exposure to Ready Player One, so just to give you guys a feel for how I came upon this, I started listening to some friends of ours do the Network 1901 podcast, and they did a series called Explain This Book to Me, where if you didn't want to read the book, like someone would explain it to you. It's like that Cliff Notes version of fiction.
That sounds
It's a really
awesome.
brilliant idea. Yeah, it's awesome. It was really cool. But they were explaining it so well that I'm like, oh, I have to read this. This sounds awesome. So I got the audiobook, the Will Wheaton audiobook, where he narrates the entire thing.
Will Wheaton reads it?
Will Wheaton reads it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's super meta because he's
He's
like in it
mentioned
mentioning
in it.
himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like mentioning himself as he reads. It was really cool. So shout out to Network 1901 and Shannon and Dale there. But I thought that the movie was just okay because the book is very good. I like the book is almost borderline great, not quite, because there's some. I think that I have some issues with that. But I think that the movie. The movie cannot handle the characters and the plot as well as the film does because there's so much packed into the book. So automatically you have to remove a lot, and I actually don't know if enough was removed in the movie to make it a little bit more cohesive. So, but this question did. I want to get your guys' take on this because I had this moment where I went, "What is this a problem with Spielberg adaptations?" Which is the dumbest question of all time. And then, so I look up like Spielberg movies based on books. I'm like, oh no, that's not a problem at all. Like,
Really not.
There's an amazing catalog. I mean, of things that
Jurassic
he's
Park,
done.
Schindler's List.
Exactly. Some of my favorite ones. So that was kind of me being an idiot. But I do feel like, I don't know. I want to get your guys' take on this. I felt like Spielberg, who normally challenges himself with the story and the storytelling component, it almost felt more like he was challenging himself with this film in relation to visually how to go dive into all these geek references, and I feel like that the story suffered because of it. But I don't know. What's your take on that?
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that he found it really difficult. I think he's on record as saying he found this quite an exhausting process just because of the sheer scale and number of the effects involved. And that's why he sort of went off and did the post as a palate cleanser, because that's the kind of thing he does. Let's work with Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks just as a little entre-course thing. It'll be fine. But yeah, there's a huge info dump in the first 10-15 minutes of the film. Like the exposition there is so heavy because he's trying to establish the world so he can get that out of the way and concentrate on the characters, but there's still so much more world building to be done that I don't think he ever really concentrates on the characters as much as he wants to, never mind as much as we want him to as an audience.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I think that's true. My regard for this film might be a little bit higher than your guys', but not as high as it was after my first viewing. So the first time I saw it, I thought that was amazing. That was like not the best Spielberg film I'd ever seen, but amazing. And now after watching it a second time, I'm like, okay, it's just really good. It's not amazing. It's really good. So
now, Helen, have you read the book?
I've read the book. Yeah, I read the book before the movie because I thought it would be the kind of thing that I would like, which is not entirely the case. We'll get to that. But I actually had the slightly opposite opinion. I went in and when I first saw the movie, I was a little bit more disappointed. And second time around, I was actually in America. I went to the Cinerama Dome in LA, which had been recommended as one of the great movie theaters. And it was amazing. And I saw it there, and I was more impressed with it second time around. I think some of the, maybe just because I'd taken on board all of the kind of just that information, then I was able to maybe sit back and enjoy it a bit more. But I liked it better.
Onslaught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'd still, I mean, for me, it would be like an Empire terminology. We do stars out of 5. For me, it would be a solid 3, but definitely no more than that.
Which is a recommendation.
Which is a recommendation.
Yeah.
You know, we are sitting about, I don't know, maybe 25 miles or maybe 35 miles, somewhere in that range from the Cinerama Dome.
Oh, cool.
And I've never even heard of it.
Me neither.
Yeah. I'm going to have to go to that. That sounds awesome.
It's a good theater. It was awesome.
Cool.
It often feels like people that don't live in California are more familiar with Los Angeles than we are.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say that this was due to a screenwriter friend of mine. He asked me for recommendations when he came to London last year. So when I was going to LA, I was like, right, you need to pay back time. You know, come on, where do I need to go? And that was one of that, and The Egyptian were 2 of his recommendations.
Okay, we know that one.
Yeah, The Egyptian was magic. I wanted to move to LA because of The Egyptian. It's an amazing place.
That's cool.
Awesome. Well, before we get into the really deep stuff, just for fun, what were some of your guys' favorite pop culture references in the film? Obviously, there were a ton.
Yeah, I know.
There were quite a few. I liked King Kong. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Not so much because it was a nerdy reference, just because I thought it was really well done. And I guess the Akira bike was pretty cool. I thought that was good.
For sure.
And the Iron Giant. Sorry, I'm forgetting.
Yeah. Yeah, I looked up all the Easter eggs that you might have missed, right? Like, and it's like this giant page of stuff that was like, oh yeah, if you pause the movie at this point, you can see in the background, you know. And honestly, none of the Easter eggs were all that impressive to me. What was impressive to me is the scene wherein they film it like The Shining is just gorgeous. And I don't even like The Shining, so it's not really my thing. But I'm like, if you're gonna do this, this is like the way to do this.
Yeah,
this
was amazing.
Yeah, this is outstanding. The Iron Giant, like Helen said, that is beautifully rendered. Like the way that it is visually on screen is phenomenal. So I
kind of makes
like
you
that.
wish the original movie looked like that.
No, but the other thing about the Iron Giant is, of course, putting him in there instantly gives you some heart and some emotion, because I cannot see that, like a drawing of that character, without getting a little bit emotional and thinking about the word Superman and just being a bit like, oh my god. So it's kind of a cheat in a way, because I feel like it gives you instant like emotion in a film that maybe doesn't always earn it quite so well.
You know, that's probably, I didn't realize this until you just said that, but that's probably why both the book and the film, in my mind, can't be considered great, because the book itself relies so much on your love of the stuff that it's talking about that it can kind of get away with things that maybe it shouldn't be able to get away with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting, because you're hitting on something that I was thinking as I was listening to the most recent version of the ranking that you guys did on the Star Trek films, and you commented on how the reason you love the original cast films is because even if you haven't seen the original, I think you said this, Helen, even if you hadn't seen the original series, you still know who those people are.
Yeah.
And you have that history, and so you feel that gravity. And I started thinking about that. I'm like, well, where do we land on that? Like, is it better for a film to have nothing like that to pull on and to still be great? Or is it better for a film to be great because it has all this other stuff it can pull into it, and it can kind of make a big conglomerate of it for you? So I don't know. I don't know if one is more.
I mean, I think it's in some ways
more.
I think it's more impressive if you can do it from scratch in one movie. And I think there are movies and characters who are just sort of instantly lovable that way. I mean, I'm thinking about something like the 5-minute scene between Hiccup and Toothless in How to Train Your Dragon.
Oh yeah.
And it's wordless pretty much, and it's just them sort of starting to form that connection. By the end of that scene, you would die for either of those two. You know. Having known nothing about them before. And I think there are those characters in film, Baymax maybe in Big Hero 6, instantly lovable.
Yeah.
And it is impressive when you can do it off the bat. But yeah, if you're gonna use existing characters, this is one of my bugbears that I guess I keep coming back to in lots of different stories. You have to tap into the thing that makes them what they are. So if you're going to tell a Superman story, it has to tap into the essence of Superman, or you've failed on many, many levels.
Yeah.
Basically. So yeah.
Yeah, I one of the things that's really interesting to me is, as a writer, I frequently do not want to go tell another story with the same characters in it, because it's so hard to take a character through 2 arcs. It can be done, but it's very, very difficult. You have to be like, well, their fatal flaw is this in the first, work of art. Well, what's their fatal flaw going to be in the second? Because I don't know that they, you know what I mean? Like, it's just this weird, it's very strange, it's an odd thing to try and do.
That's why you get Shrek wanting to be alone and then realizing that people are important in every single Shrek film.
Exactly. And actually, that's very true. Like real people are oftentimes either more or less interesting than characters, depending on how you want to look at it. But because real people struggle with the same things most of the time, long portions of their life. So the character arc is not like this, well, this 1 month adventure happens and the guy Shrek realizes that people matter, no, it's like, 30 years of you trying to figure out that people matter. It's like, that's a pretty boring film at that point. So I think what's really frustrating is that now that basically marketers have determined that people love the characters and they fall in love with the characters, it's like, keep turning stuff out with those same characters. And it was no more frustrating than in the TV series Heroes, because the TV series Heroes was supposed to reboot every season with a new character list. And the first season I loved, and the second season was awful.
So
and it just
bad.
kept going downhill. And that's a good example of it. It's like, okay, those characters all went through their arcs, and now you're bringing them back, and now it doesn't even seem like Peter Petrelli anymore. He's some other dude, or you're rehashing the same thing he went through before. That's just so. I think it's a good question, but I think nostalgia can, in that context, you can use it in positive ways, but you can also use it as a means by which to. What was a movie recently? Okay, so Jurassic World, the first one, because I haven't seen Fallen Kingdom. It uses all of those tropes, like, oh, we're going to make you feel all of this nostalgia for things that you really shouldn't feel it for, but we did a great movie, 20 years ago or whatever it was.
The Jeep and the T-shirt and all that
stuff. Exactly. So I just think it's not fair. It's not fair sometimes.
I think you're exactly right. I think the difference between good and bad nostalgia is the difference between The Wrath of Khan and Into Darkness, for example. Because one is using a pre-existing relationship and pre-existing characters to do something that makes you feel like, still, I'm not over. And the other one is riffing on that and trying to tap into that emotion without actually bringing anything to the table and without earning the right in the first place.
It's really good.
But anyway, that's a whole other story. My problems with Into Darkness, so we should probably not talk about that ever again.
It looks like we have a Make It Better Into Darkness episode in our future.
Yeah. That is another version of, we also do these episodes called Make It Better, where we'll take a film and try and tweak it. So that might be what we have to do next.
There's a long list of issues with that one.
Okay, real quick before I go into the deep question, my favorite pop culture reference was actually not a visual one. It was an audio one.
Oh.
And there's several points in the film where you hear Back to the Future music.
Oh, yeah.
That's my favorite. I love that.
Yeah.
That's really
I just get the instant Back to the Future sort of adventurous tension in my chest when I hear that. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
The
other two I had on my list were also the DeLorean and the Zemeckis Cube.
Yeah.
Those
Zemeckis Cube.
That was cute.
I think that's where it's not fair, because I instantly am like, I love Back to the Future. I'm so glad you brought it up. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not fair.
He knew that. It's very heavily featured.
Yeah.
Before we continue, we want to let you guys know about all the additional stuff you can find over at thestorygeeks.com. You can find our latest YouTube videos, Patreon posts, additional content written by our blogger, Ashley Pauls. Be sure to check out her Women of Star Wars series that's been going on there. It's fantastic. We have Make It Better on Green Lantern with Scott Nicewander. We talked about that already. We have Leia's character journey with Alexis Torres. And we have our top 5 time travel movies with Mike Faber and Mike Gordon from ESO. Whole bunch of great stuff and some more great stuff coming up as well. So you can find all of that at thestorygeeks.com.
Not to mention our podcast with Helen O'Hara on Captain America's character journey.
That's right.
Which was awesome. We'd also love it if you would support us, and there are 3 ways to do that. You can support us monthly through our Patreon page. Patreon is a website that allows fans like you to support creators like us. When you support the show for as little as $2 a month, although most people do it for $3 a month. But if you support us for $2 a month, you get access to our aftercasts. Our aftercast is really fun this week. We talk about human consciousness, and we also talk about our favorite movies with virtual worlds. So if you want to support us on Patreon, which we hope you do, please go to the show notes and click on the Patreon link, patreon.com/thestorygeeks, and then choose a reward tier, and we will hopefully benefit you with additional content. Finally, if you're like me and you're a big theme park fan, check out modernmouseboutique.com. Modern Mouse Boutique sells geek fashion accessories, and they're famous for having some of the highest quality mouse ears you can buy if you're planning a trip to a theme park, or if you're just a geek fan in general. Check out modernmouseboutique.com. Our friends Angie and Josh are awesome people. And if you use promo code StoryGeeks, that's all one word, StoryGeeks, no spaces, use promo code StoryGeeks and get 10% off your next order. Links to our Patreon page and Modern Mouse Boutique can all be found in the show notes or on our blog at thestorygeeks.com. Thanks for letting us interrupt. Now let's get back to the show.
Okay, let's go deep. So,
Sure.
Wade says, these days reality is a bummer. Everyone's looking for a way to escape. And that people have stopped trying to fix problems and are just trying to outlive them. So I'm wondering, how far do you think we are from that degree of escapism in real life? What do you think, Helen?
I think we're not as far as we'd like to be.
Yeah.
I think there's an element of absolute escapism that is we need right now. I don't think it's always a bad thing. I'm very much in favor of escapism as a concept. I genuinely believe it's one of the ways that film is important and that it can help people, and it can, just taking you out of your own head for 2 hours can be a gift, and it's a really important one. But at the same time, I think it is probably bad if it takes over your life. And I think I see a lot of it in my country here in the UK. I'll be honest, this is me being political. Brexit's going to be an absolute nightmarish disaster, and everyone's hoping that something will happen. I think we're all having it with the environment. I think the whole world is having it. You talk to lots of very intelligent, very well-educated people about the environment, and they say, well, somebody's going to figure something out. And it's like, well,
That's
maybe.
how we felt before Trump got elected.
Yeah.
Right? And,
He's not going to win.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of this kind of wishful thinking of, well, someone will sort it out. I don't have to do anything. Just please let me not think about it because I can't take it. That is a valid, I don't want to make it sound like that's not a valid response. That is a valid response. Self-care is important, and people shouldn't feel obliged to do stuff if it, worsens their mental health or whatever. But at the same time, the escapist urge is strong, and we now have more means than we've had in the past. We're not quite at the Oasis level yet, but we're not that far off.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's definitely got real world parallels, and deliberately so. I credit him with both Spielberg and Eric with that. So yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, I was reflecting on this question. I'm like, has reality ever not been a bummer?
That's true.
It seems like, I think that there's an assumption sometimes that because a couple things are happening, probably because of social media too, and all the fact that we see like everyone else is posting the best things in their life.
Yeah,
it's sort of like, well, yeah, then my life must be a bummer because I'm taking out the trash and that person's in Hawaii. You know what I mean? Like,
But last week that person wasn't posting, and they spent the whole week taking out the trash. Maybe.
Exactly.
We don't know.
Right. Exactly right. And that's kind of how it works. It's like we're all just like enthralled by the thought that escapism could be a real thing. Whereas in the past, maybe and I agree with Helen, escapism is not necessarily inherently a problem. It's if you choose it all the time consistently, right? Like,
right.
Because I mean, we've seen this in other films. We see this in. My wife and I watched Wall-E the other night.
Oh.
Totally about escapism, right? Like
Yep.
the entire human race is escaping. The Matrix is an interesting one because it's about escapism, but it's also about because you have the character in the Matrix. I can't remember his name, but he's the guy that chooses the Matrix over reality. Because he's like, why would I? Yeah. There you go. He's like, I don't care if this steak isn't real. It tastes amazing, right? Cypher. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
Good pickup.
Yeah.
So the other question that I think is interesting that I'm not sure that we're this is getting really crazy deep, but you'd also have to ask yourself, what is reality? Because there's certain people out there that might tell you, well, reality is what you make of it. And if you're making these, like the Oasis, for example, you're making an alternate version of reality, but your brain in the Oasis, it's real for them. And so then it's kind of a question of like, well, which reality should you choose and why? Now, I'm not saying I believe that, but I just think that there's people who would make that argument.
But that is also true within the terms of, so there's a couple of levels of that. First of all, it's true within the terms of the book and the film, in the sense that you can learn a living in the Oasis. You go to school in the Oasis. You earn money in the Oasis, and that's, that matters in the real world. That has feedback to the real world. So it's true in that sense.
Yes.
But also, obviously, there's all these kind of, theories about how we build our own reality, and how people who are, you read these articles about people who are resilient, and it's not that they have had less bad stuff happen to them in their lives that gives them this outlook that enables them to carry on in awful circumstances. It's that they have taught themselves to deal with it in a certain way. So they have built their own reality. And again, that's obviously, it can be an incredibly powerful and positive thing.
Yep.
I think for Wade, even, I think it's not just escaping the Oasis. It is a way of taking control, a way of asserting himself, a way of finding himself as a personality and a person in a way that he maybe doesn't have room to in the real world. I think that's probably true of a lot of us kind of geeks, really, is that we sort of, chime with these characters in fiction in a way that we sometimes have trouble with in the real world.
That is a great point. Yeah, that's absolutely. Yeah, absolutely true. I love that line of thinking. And I do think that like the other question too is right, like the world can be a huge bummer. In fact, oftentimes you'll find that it is that's consistently the case. And I wonder too if we said to ourselves like, well, why wouldn't we want to build one that would be better than this one, right? Like it's at least something that you should consider for a second. I think that the interesting conclusion though is that all of these films tell us that the real world, despite its problems, is still better. Like they all come to the same conclusion. It's almost like we all are sitting here going like, yeah, we know we can't build a better one, which is weird because maybe we could, but it's just weird that we don't think that. And so some of that I'm wondering if I wonder if when we experience problems and when life is a bummer, it actually gives us different perspectives that though they are not maybe, chemically a dopamine hit, after we've experienced them, it gives us such a new perspective on life, on things that are bigger than life, that to choose escapism always would never give us those insights, would never give us the ability to see the world in those ways, and therefore we have to have a world that's a bummer. And if we were to build a perfect world that isn't a bummer, we'd have to work in things that were a bummer just to teach ourselves to recognize that there's other ways of viewing the world. I don't know. That's what
the robots realized in the Matrix, right? They tried to create a perfect utopia for humanity, and humanity kept going, this doesn't seem right.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. So I don't know. I'm not I don't have any of the right degrees or experience to say what all this means, but it feels like that I think that the storytellers are coming to the conclusion that living in the real world is valuable. And I think the book actually does a really good job of explaining that it's not that escaping to the Oasis is a problem. Because actually, like halfway through the book, they basically state like the Oasis is great, but then at the end of the book, they also state, so is the real world. And so there's this duality that seems like what we're supposed to embrace, as opposed to just a complete rejection of escapism or a complete acceptance of it.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. So literally just on TV, I just turned it off to do this. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was on, and I just saw the Mirror of Erised scene. And Dumbledore saying it does not do to dwell in dreams and forget to live. So it's exactly the same point in Harry Potter as well. You've got to engage with the world, and you can't completely, at least, turn your back on it, even for someone who's built an entire wizarding world for herself to live in.
And as normal, Dumbledore has said it way better and way more concisely than I could have.
He's had 150 years of practice or whatever.
True.
And he's a wizard. You're not a wizard.
And he's a wizard.
Come on.
Well, isn't he? Are we sure?
Oh,
I'm pretty
point.
sure. But not to harp on it too much, but I almost kind of feel like we have reached this degree of escapism. Now, it's not for different reasons, though. Like, we don't have something as advanced as the Oasis. We don't have that completely immersive experience. But we have social media. We have Twitter. We have Facebook. We have Instagram, like you were talking about before. And depending on where you are in the world, some places really are suffering from this much breakdown and deterioration.
True.
Yeah, that's true.
In the States, we're not. And I think right in the UK, you guys aren't either. I'm thinking of horrific stuff. But personally,
there's some places in the States though.
That's true.
Like
That's
you
true.
don't want to be there.
But personally, you can be experiencing that. You can have a health issue. You can have a terrible family situation.
Absolutely.
You can have a terrible job that's mistreating you. You can be abused. Yeah. So many different things.
Yeah.
So it may not be as global as it is in Ready Player One, but I feel like
it's
I kind of think we are there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
So.
And that's not even talking about gaming. And I am not the one to talk about this because I'm not a gamer, and that's one of my issues, I think, with the film and the book. But there is an immersive element to some games, like when friends of mine have gotten addicted to World of Warcraft or something, and just disappeared for like a month,
totally.
or longer. I don't know, but those kind of worlds are already very much in the same kind of direction, if not degree, as the Oasis.
I know that I've had these experiences myself where I used to be into gaming when I was in my early teen years because I actually had time for it at that point. And I remember playing the game Doom, which was early.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's like the first
it's one of the very few I've played.
Yeah, there you go. So see, it was really fun, and it was like you could play against other people. And we had to it's so crazy because it was so low tech. Like we had local area networks where you'd literally run a cable from your different computers to the different computers. And I remember thinking we
had an IT room in college because none of us had laptops because it was too early for everyone to have laptops.
Oh, that's perfect.
So we had this room with computers to write your essays and stuff, and we would go in there and play Doom.
That's awesome. That is the preferred thing to do over essays. I think escapism over real world. But one of the things that came up consistently was always like I'd hear people talking about, well, isn't this terrible that people are playing these games where you shoot other characters and I'm like, yeah, but I mean it's a giant glob of pixels, and I mean it just seemed. And then later on in life, I've been shocked by I'll watch some game that just came out and how realistic it is.
Yeah.
And the same arguments are still out there, and I'm sure that the teenagers they're going no man, it's just like a fake game, and I'm sitting here looking at it going I don't know man, it looks real to me, but. And I don't know where that even takes you, but yeah, I think that's very true, Helen, is that the games are getting more and more immersive all the time. And again, that's a great thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does create some issues. So,
well, that brings up the question: do you think the Oasis is a positive or negative thing? And do you think Halliday regretted creating it?
I think the answer to the second question is yes. I think he did regret it, at least to a degree. He was aware of its sort of negative consequences and the dangers that it posed, I think, more than anyone else. And I think aware that he needed it maybe as a sort of, I think that the clear implication is that he suffers from some kind of dissociative autistic spectrum maybe condition, something like that, right? and the implication being he may have needed it to sort of as a safe space to interact with people, but he realized that maybe it isn't the best way to interact with people. And so yeah, so I think he maybe regretted it. As to whether it's a negative overall, it's harder to say. It's certainly, I agree with the sort of thesis of the film. It would be negative if a titan of industry controls the whole thing and is advertising on 80% of your view field. You know. But of course, I'm a huge lefty, and that's why I'm saying that. But no, I think, you know, that having a monopolistic control of something that is so essential to people is really dangerous. Yeah, I don't know. Would people have done better about fixing the world if there wasn't the Oasis to escape into? Or is the Oasis the only way they can cope with the way the world is? You know, it's I don't know enough to answer that.
Yeah. And I feel like Halliday, I think he probably had the absolute best of intentions, right? Because you talked about he's disassociative in some way, and I don't think he really had any way of understanding the level of exploitation that was going to occur in the Oasis after he created it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Yeah.
I think he thought, this is what I need. This is going to be wonderful for me. It'll be wonderful for everybody else, and everybody's going to be happy.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, dude, people are going to try to take it over. People are going to try to control it. They're going to use it for their own interests.
Yeah.
So it definitely didn't turn out the way he thought, I think.
No, not at all. One of the things I found interesting that the question prompted for me too was the Oasis has the ability to simulate an environment that solves the problem of scarcity and limited resources, and it can even solve for social status, right? Because, like, let's just say you're born into something that causes you to be of lower social stature for whatever reason, that whatever context that means. The Oasis can solve for all of those things, but the interesting thing I found was that it doesn't solve for them, because so it made me wonder, like, do we bring that problem even to the real world? Like, is the problem of scarcity or is the problem of social status a big deal inherently in the real world? Or do we as human beings bring that into the world ourselves? And do we cause that problem more so than the environment causes that problem? Because we're definitely causing it in the Oasis, right? Like, it's weird. It's kind of a weird thing to think about.
I think it's probably true that human beings bring their quest for status and hierarchy with them wherever we go. I think that's probably true, and I think it's something that we're very slowly over the past few hundred years have begun to fight. And I do think it is something we're fighting. I mean, you know, poor people today are still better off than serfs for the most part.
Right.
Yeah.
One would hope. You know, I think you know, the Martin Luther King line about the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, I think is true. I think there is that hope that we are headed roughly in the right direction. We're maybe in a position at the moment where we're taking a few steps back, but the hope is then we take a few more steps forward. But I think it's weird, isn't it? And how? So I have a friend who is very big in business, and he looks at futurism a lot and tries to predict where things are going so he can invest in the right areas. And he's convinced that basically every job will be done by machines in the next 50 to 100 years. You know, from truck drivers to lawyers, it'll be you know, AI capable. So what do people do in that circumstance for status, for money, for self-worth? You know, what do you build your life around? And he had a theory that people were going to become sort of micro-influencers, that everyone would have their sort of clique online. They would find their thing and be an expert in that thing, and that is the thing that would give them a sort of sense of self-worth, and maybe an income, whatever, or maybe there'd be universal basic income. It's a whole weird long conversation. But my point is, he you know, even if you assume that everyone in the real world has enough physical resources to live on, there will still be that need for something more, something to differentiate you as a person, even if it's not specifically status in terms of, you know, dominance over other people. Something to make yourself feel individual, I think, is something that we always want, and we always struggle with. And I think we're probably always going to. certainly as far up as the Federation. Yeah, but by that point, they seem to have most things figured out. But we've got a bit of time till we get to Star Trek.
It's true. The AI will get to Star Trek before we do, I think.
They will, yeah, they will, sadly, yeah.
I
it might be more A&M Banks, actually, by the time we get there. We'll have these giant minds that control society and look after all the hard stuff. You know?
Exactly. I got the impression, so I think that, I don't know about your take on this, Helen, but I got the impression that the Halliday from the book was somewhat different than the Halliday from the movie in regards to his impression of the Oasis. Because I got the sense that in the film, Halliday was still searching for something that had eluded him. Like, he hadn't really come to any conclusions at the end of it almost, just that, like, I almost get more of a sense of hopelessness from him. Like, it's just sort of hopeless no matter what happens. That's not necessarily the sense that I got from the book. I got the sense from the book that Halliday, through his creation of the Oasis and through operating in the Oasis, sort of learned about what was important in life and then was trying to convey that to all of the people competing in the contest. So it was a little different for me, and I'm not sure if that's maybe more Mark Rylance's performance, which, by the way, I love Mark Rylance, but I didn't quite think he fits in this role. It was real weird. Yeah, it was real awkward for me for some reason. I love him as an actor, but I just maybe it was my impression of the character from the book and then seeing it on screen and done in this way. Maybe that was what was odd for me. So I would just say that in the book, it seems like the character has come to a conclusion of like, because there's more time spent on his love lost, you know, because he loves the wife of his co-founder. What was his co-founder? Ogden, yeah.
Ogden Morrow.
Yeah, Ogden Morrow. That was a great name, by the way.
Yeah.
Ogden Morrow.
It's a good name.
But I think that there's less time spent there, so we don't get as much into Halliday, in my opinion. So it's hard for me to tell where he's at the end of the film. Like,
I feel like he's got a sense of peace at the end of the film, similar, sort of related to what I was saying earlier about his intentions for creating the Oasis, because he created the Oasis because he felt like he was an outsider to the rest of humanity, right? Like there was something that they all understood that he didn't understand. And I feel like at the end of this film it's switched. I feel like he has learned. He's like, maybe I was better off. You know, he's like, he sort of learned. I think I understand something about the simplicity of life that now everybody else has confused. And that's kind of what he's trying to convey to the winner, to Parzival.
Yeah, I got more of this sense. Yeah, I got to think more of that sense from him. And I think the thing about Mark Rylance is that he's, especially in this kind of role, he had it a little bit in Bridge of Spies as well. There's a sort of stillness to him at the heart of him that I think that worked quite well as a knowing, all-knowing kind of guru.
Yeah.
And so he fit better with the character at the end of the film in that sense for me. I mean, the interesting thing about the film is it sort of does that whole, I can't remember this bit from the book. It does that whole, you know, you're not just a program, you're more than a program. So the implication being he has essentially uploaded his mind to the Oasis and become part of the Oasis.
Yeah.
And that's interesting just to throw away there at the end, because why then couldn't he just solve a whole lot of this stuff in other ways?
Well, okay, so that was one of my questions, is actually what do you think Halliday actually is at the end of the film? So you think that he's pretty much just uploaded his entire mind into the Oasis? I
don't know if I don't know how I'd technically explain it, if I'd call him the singularity or something. You know, I think maybe he is essentially that, because maybe if you take a good human soul and you put them in a machine that has an incredible amount of processing power, maybe that's essentially what you end up with, at least as far as the world of the Oasis goes. So I don't know what to call him, but I think he is. Certainly the impression I felt I was meant to have is that he is there as a full being, if you like.
See, after hearing that, I feel like Jay and I need to go back and revisit an old episode. So we did an episode a while back on Blade Runner.
Right.
And we talked with our guest, Michael Gordon, a lot about, could AI be a real thing? Like, could we actually have AI as intelligent as humans? And we sort of landed on no, like we can never quite get there because I forget some of the things we talked about.
Didn't say that they couldn't be as intelligent. No, we weren't even saying that because they actually do have complex reasoning. We were saying that they would never be able to experience emotion.
Yes, yeah.
That was the real big component of it.
But what if this is the way through that, like uploading Halliday into the Oasis? I'm still not saying we can do that in real life, but I'm just saying, like, what if that's the bridge, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about this book and these ideas, like, these are old sci-fi ideas, you know? Mm-hmm. These have been, like, certainly since, well, many of them since the birth of cyberpunk, some of them going a lot further back to Asimov and Clarke and the rest. There has been this fascination of what is our relationship with machines we haven't invented yet. Which is kind of a weird thing as a society to be preoccupied with.
Yeah.
But we're really concerned about, okay, but when we have robots, what will the rules governing their behavior be? You know? And it's similar to this. I feel like this has been a subject of continuing fascination for people. Yes, but when we have AI, will we be able to upload our brains to the cloud? You know, and it is a source of fascination to me as well. What do you do if you have a human capacity for, you know, intuition and leaps of faith, and not in the God sense necessarily, but just generally, and emotion, and empathy, and you put that in with the processing power of a computer? Because somebody was telling me the other night, by the time we get to AI, and get to a machine that is capable of thinking as fast as capable of thinking like a human does, machine thinking is about 22,000 times as fast as us.
Yeah.
So as soon as we get to that point, then it accelerates like crazy. Mm-hmm. So we don't know what will happen, and we have no way of understanding what will happen, which is, of course, another book that Steven Spielberg was almost going to adapt, Robopocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Which is kind of a wannabe World War Z, if I'm honest. But it's but that element of things, like the robot sort of takeover, is quite well thought out, I thought.
I actually had the same interpretation. I have 3 different potential interpretations of how you could take that question, the Halliday question at the end.
Ooh.
And by the way, I do believe that that
is one of them Force Ghost?
No. It should be. That's my 4th one now.
I'm just asking.
I will say that if there is anybody who has like already uploaded their consciousness to this, you know, this brain, and that will all be part of that person's hive mind, it's probably Elon Musk at this point. It's
God
probably,
forbid.
Yeah. Who knows where that's going to be? But anyways, so I do think that Helen's interpretation is the first one that I came up with as well. Just saying that Halliday managed, I'm calling it download his consciousness into the Oasis.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm calling it that because we don't really know what the consciousness is still. So the interesting thing about the consciousness and AI is that obviously the consciousness is some form of energy in the way that your brain works. And could a computer predict the way that your brain was going to work every single time and then upload it? Well, that's where Helen's question of leaps of faith is a really fascinating one, because human beings do tend to have ruts in their brains where they will interact the same way with the world over time. However, we also seem to have, despite some of the thinkers out there and what they say, they also seem to have some form of free will where we could change that thinking. So I don't know what that means in terms of, can you take the consciousness? Is the brain more? I guess the question is the brain more than a series of ones and zeros making decisions?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, but that would you'd have to go down that level of concept to accept this as what actually happened with Halliday, which, you know, who knows?
Yeah, and that is big philosophical concepts right there. That is
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Soul levels, yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that makes the message of the movie a lot stranger than the message of the book, because I got the sense that the message of the film was it's worth it to engage in the real world.
Yeah.
But it's weird for the guy who created the Oasis to be like, oh, well, I'm so in love with the Oasis that I'm uploading my consciousness to it.
Well, but there's I mean, there's a sense of tragedy there because there was a point when he realized his time in the real world was coming to an end.
Yeah, sure.
He was going to die. So
good point. So it's like, well, what alternative do I have?
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah. Totally get that. And there's a weird part of that too, where in the book there's like, well, in the movie too, there's the off button, right? So like, it's kind of like, hey, you can kill me if you want to, because my consciousness is now in here, but like, it's just weird. It's an odd thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, by the way, don't shut it down because I'm in here, you know. Anyway, so I think that's interesting, but I think it would be it convolutes the message of the movie perhaps for me a little bit. Maybe I'm just not thinking about it correctly. So I did come up with two other interpretations though. The second one is that Halliday is actually referring to his character in the Oasis as what people came to know him as, and the embodiment of what people's perceptions were, not the real him. So he's basically saying like, no, I died. This is just all your perception of who I was. You've researched me a billion times. You know every decision that I've ever made. You have all the things that you can go back and look in the room that I grew up in and see all the conversations that I ever had. But you really didn't know the real me, and that person died. I like that interpretation personally, just because I think it actually falls in alignment with his character and falls in alignment with what the story is trying to teach. Like, we need to know these people in the real world. Like, that's kind of the embodiment of it, right? Like, we don't know Artemis until we know her in the Oasis and in the real world. We don't know Wade until we know him in the Oasis and in the real world. And I think what Halliday could be saying here is, nobody knew me. Nobody took the time to know me.
What if he didn't even exist?
I think he is saying that to an extent.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe Ogden being the possible somewhat exception, but I think that's something he's saying in any case. Whatever we're looking at the end.
Yeah. Right.
The conspiracy theory answer to that is, what if he didn't even exist?
Did he never existed?
What if Halliday never existed in the real world, and this is all behind the mind of Ogden Morrow?
I'm just done with this podcast now.
You are blowing this thing wide open. That's amazing.
The only other possibility that I could come up with, besides Force Ghost, which I think is amazing, is that I'm wondering if what he's actually referring to, and this would actually lead towards a sequel more, is that someone else took on the role of Halliday, as if someone else took on the role of Batman. So it's kind of like, oh, no, yeah, I'm Halliday now, but the real Halliday is a different guy, and he's dead now. I'm a different Halliday. But of course, that's like, again, this is putting a lot of interpretation on one line of the movie.
Yeah.
You know?
Where the real answer is probably, I don't know.
Yeah.
We don't want you to know.
We don't want you to know.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
We want you to do exactly
Spielberg
what you're doing
like,
now.
why did you guys take 15 minutes on a podcast to talk about that? That is not what I was going for.
Maybe it's like that. Oh goodness, I've forgotten the name of the film. Classic noir film, Humphrey Bogart, Raymond Chandler.
Maltese
anyway.
Falcon?
Maltese Falcon.
Yeah.
I think it was the Maltese Falcon. Let's say it is anyway. And if I'm wrong on the details of the plot, you'll know and you'll be able to correct me.
Okay.
So the
People
famous
forgive
story
us
goes
for that kind of thing all the time.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
The story goes that he goes and asks the director, "Hey, who killed the butler?" And the director goes, "I don't know. Go ask the screenwriter." And the screenwriter says, "I don't know. Go ask Raymond Chandler." And he goes and asks Raymond Chandler who killed the butler, and Raymond Chandler's like, "I don't know. It just felt like it would happen." And maybe it's a little bit similar, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, it could be. And by the way, as a writer, this kind of stuff all the time happens where you're like, I don't know, I just put it in there. And then people are like, no, it must mean something. I'm like, yeah, I try to have everything mean something, but sometimes I just screw it up. So, yeah, that's true.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, one thing I wanted to touch on is this idea of the loyalty center. So it's essentially a prison, right? I mean, more or less. It's not law enforcement, but it's run by this greedy corporation, IOI, and they call it the Loyalty Center. So I'm curious how you guys think about that, how you think what that says about Nolan Sorrento's motivation.
I mean, his so the Loyalty Center is essentially a debtor's prison, I guess, which is certainly something we had here in the UK in the 19th century. Charles Dickens' dad famously was in debtor's prison for some time because he owed money. And it does feel like the kind of thing that's coming back, because you get these big corporations essentially working with government to enforce their needs on people. So it doesn't feel like a big leap again. But in terms of motivation for wanting to control the ISIS, I think this is something that the film and Ben Mendelsohn did really well, which is to show that it is a matter of life or death for this corporation to have the control and to certainly, at the very least, ensure that the Oasis doesn't change, but really, ideally, to get control of it and be able to monopolize it themselves. But it's life or death really for them, and I think that the film does quite well at kind of conveying that. Weirdly, I mean, the stakes are probably higher for them than they are for Parzival and the rest.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, the IOI is it's capitalism gone completely wrong, right? Like, it's like the embodiment of corporate greed, and it's all personified through Sorrento, which I think is actually kind of cool, because it's always super tropey when it's like, well, there's this one corporation and it's super greedy. It's like, well, the corporation doesn't make its own decisions unless it is controlled by like some sort of artificial intelligence. There's people in there that are doing those things collectively. Yeah. So it's kind of cool that they embody it in Sorrento. I think that we're even seeing that. We're seeing a version of it now here in the States with net neutrality. So I'm kind of wondering how that's going to work out. But there is this inherent thing in people that, like, when people have a desire for something, they will exploit one another to get it, whether it's power or money or, I mean, whatever it is. IOI tends to be the embodiment of that. They want their money, they want their power, and they're going to exploit people to get it. And it's, you know, what's interesting is they as if they were to control it, people become the machines from the Matrix at that point, right? I mean, they're just going to gobble up other people and just use them to exploit whatever they can. Yeah,
it's you know, I mean, again, just we were talking before we started about the state of media and the internet and so on, and I think you're right. It absolutely does come back to the current state of affairs again. In that everybody's scrambling for our attention, and, you know, like, just a little thing like adverts are getting incredibly intrusive online. And since these new EU laws came in about data protection, we keep getting all these rather pleading messages from websites going, oh, but if you don't let us put cookies on your machine, then we won't be able to personalize the ads, and you won't get ads that are personal to you. And it's like, I don't want ads that are personal to me. Why would I want that?
Exactly.
Why would that be of benefit to me?
Yeah.
But there's genuinely this sort of like assumption that your interests and their interests are aligned, and fundamentally they're not always. So yeah, you're right. They are the cogs in the machine, and we're kind of at risk of becoming the same thing.
I wonder what it is about humanity. Like I encounter so many people now, because it is so easy, right, to go watch a YouTube video. It's so easy to, listen to a podcast, whatever it is. But when I run into people, more often than not, they are craving personal connections far more than they are the media. And yet we still keep investing so much in the media. I mean, this is someone who's doing a podcast, so, maybe turn it off for a second and go talk to a friend of yours. But at the same time,
discuss amongst yourselves.
Yeah. I just think it's really interesting. Like, there seems to be a pretty intense craving for connection, and yet we're in some ways more connected than we've ever been.
It's a different kind of connection, though, and it's a different level maybe of connection. But I think also the problem is, well, I mean, people talk about this in relation to internet dating, but, the problem is kind of this illusion that everything is at your fingertips, and then how do you possibly decide on one thing? How do you possibly decide on one person on this dating website? Because, okay, yes, you like the look of them, and yes, they seem to meet your basic criteria, but there is that one thing in their profile where they've got like an apostrophe in the wrong place, and come on, does that mean they're an idiot and you shouldn't go out with them? I'm not saying I've ever thought that. Someone I know did. No, but like, it's but genuinely you find yourself like looking at people's profiles and going, well, there's one item here that I don't approve of, therefore I'm gonna swipe. And maybe if you met them in a bar and met them in real life, that'd be it. You'd be walking down the aisle by Saturday.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like, it is. We were talking about this at the beginning. Like, what's the easy thing to do and what's the more difficult thing to do, and oftentimes the more difficult thing to do is actually more meaningful to you in the long run.
Yeah. Well, the real personal connection comes with a risk, right?
Yeah.
Like you
That's
could be rejected. That person could not be what you want them to be.
Yeah.
You may not behave the way you want to behave in those instances. Whereas theoretically, you can control things online.
True.
Which is also not true. You can be rejected just as harshly online as you can in person.
And by a lot more people in a much shorter space of time.
Right.
It's true. It's true. That's a really good point. I think that there's a risk to both of them maybe, but you think that you can control the one, whereas with the other one you realize that you're not in complete control of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then
by
what
the
you're
way,
leaving out of it too is you're leaving out input from other people.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you can, maybe you have technically a little bit less control over a real one-to-one relationship.
Yeah.
But you're going to get influence from somebody else. You're going to get more information to help you live your life.
Well, you're going to get the emotional connection that you might not otherwise get, right? Like
Exactly.
You can have,
and you're going to get somebody else's insight. You're going to get input.
Yep.
The internet is all output.
Yep.
And even comments and stuff like that on the internet. It seems to me it's very rarely like, oh, wow, that's really helpful to me. That's going to help me live my life. It's usually just like, I like that. I don't like that.
Yeah.
You're stupid. You suck. It's like, you know?
Right. It's like you get a little bit of a dopamine hit, but you don't get the real, true emotional connection that you need.
Right.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't know how we got to that from loyalty centers, but I like it. It's good.
Yeah.
That does bring up another question though that I did not send to you guys ahead of time. Is I was thinking about this film. I was thinking about The Matrix and other movies like this where they sort of pull the veil over humanity's eyes, right? And there's the real world and there's this artificial world.
Yeah.
I feel like, just like in The Matrix, in this movie, for me, the real world, story-wise, suffers a bit. I don't feel like there's enough of it there. How do you guys feel about that? Do you feel like there's an absence there?
Yeah, I do actually. And I think it's partly because, I mean, for example, when the bomb goes off in his complex, there's no real reaction from him. There's no moment of emotion particularly. There's no sense of him being tied to that. And there are people there that he has relationships with. They may be imperfect relationships, but there are relationships there.
Yeah.
So I feel like that was an unusual emotional misstep from Spielberg, actually. I thought that was a bit of a problem. And then, I think maybe we needed to see more of it. We needed a little bit more of that and a little bit less of the, hey, look at my cool new Rubik's Cube, you know?
Yeah.
Nothing against Rubik's Cubes, wonderful toys, but yeah, I feel like you're right. I think there could have been just a bit more, just to give us a bit more context and a bit more physical stakes. But then again, maybe it's a deliberate choice to emphasize how important the Oasis is and how much it, interlinks with the real world.
It could be. It also sort of felt to me that when the idea of the resistance came in, like when we meet who Artemis is in real life and stuff like that, that sort of seemed like out of left field to me. It's like, oh, well, you didn't really build the world in a way that made me feel like that makes sense to exist, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
I will say I think the book handles it a tad bit better than the film does, but not in a real great way. I think it's really difficult. I've noticed this in lots of different stories, is that when you're dealing with this kind of two worlds scenario, because I mean Harry Potter does it and does it very well, but a lot of books do it. Like the Hunger Games series. Mm-hmm. I know that, like, for example, the first two Hunger Games books, which I read, all dealt with how do you solve this game, right? Because you have to beat the game.
Right.
And then the third one moved completely into real life. It's similar in some regards to how the Matrix trilogy worked, right? Where all of a sudden we were spending way more time in the real world than we were in the games.
Except in the Matrix, it was all underground, and so we didn't get a sense of what the world we're familiar with looked like.
Right.
Yeah.
You know?
True, that's a good point. But what's interesting about it is that it's really hard to retain the audience when you jump to either one. Yeah. Because, like, if they get bought into the game, like in the Hunger Games, I stopped reading halfway through the third book because I'm like, I don't care about this anymore. And that's not like maybe that's just my own perspective on it. But
it's so weird because very rarely can I say that I have read the books before seeing the movie.
Yeah.
Very rarely can I say that I have read the books at all. But in the case of the Hunger Games, I read all of those books before all the movies
really?
came out.
Yeah.
I don't know why,
Yeah.
but I did. And I actually like the last one the best.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, interesting.
Wow.
I know I'm
I
in
have
the
to say-
minority.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't be with you on that. My problem with the final Hunger Games book actually is that it, well, two problems. First of all, it tried to mimic the game formula too closely with all those booby traps.
Sure.
And I find that it's like, no, dude, at this point I wanted something else. I wanted it to feel different. And then my other major problem with it was the death of her sister, because that's the whole point. That's the
Yes.
whole point.
Yeah.
She needed to survive.
Which did the movies correct that? I can't remember.
No,
They did it too?
not.
Oh,
They did it too. And I get, oh, look, war is senseless and meaningless and people die. I get that. But it dramatically, I was just like, no.
Yeah, I remember reading that and thinking, wait, what the hell? And,
Yeah.
and my wife was sort of reading the books behind me. And,
Oh, gosh.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's something that happened that I don't want to ruin for you, but I want to know if they're going to do it in the movie.
I just think it can be, so to that point though, I think it can be very difficult to capture both worlds really well to the point where you can go back and forth between them and they're both meaningful. That's a lot of work to get done. And in one movie, I think it'd be almost impossible. You know, if you built it up over multiple, maybe.
I didn't think this one did it too badly in that final sort of cutting back and forth between the two battles. Obviously, one was much more visually dazzling. But I thought at least there was tension in both worlds and there were characters active in both worlds. You know, you had enough at that point of the resistance in the real world, I guess, just about to sort of look at these people.
That was.
I mean, it's not.
Yeah,
it's not as good as like Infinity War did it, much better, obviously, but or something like The Matrix even. But it's not my biggest problem with this film.
Yeah. Well, I think we are just about wrapping up here. Is there anything else you guys just have to get off your chest about Ready Player One that you've been dying to say that I haven't set you up for yet?
I'll tell you what my issue with this is. I feel like it's designed to speak to a very specific person. And I've worked with some of those people, so I know exactly who it's speaking to. But I'm not it. And it makes almost no concession to me. And not everything has to be about me. I do realize that, although some people have accused me of not. But I think it makes it limited and a little bit stunted, especially the book. And I think this is, as I say, the film, I think, loosened it up and opened it out a little bit. But the book is so concerned with hitting every single favored thing in his childhood that I like, and so many of them I don't care about. Because yes, I absolutely love Back to the Future and the Goonies and, you know, war games. But I could not care less about any of those arcade games. And so it just left me behind so often, and every time I'd sort of sink back in and get back into it, it would throw me something else that I just profoundly didn't care about, and it would just kind of lose me again. So yeah, that was kind of my big thing with it. Not just the sense of, oh, this isn't something I know about, this isn't something I have background knowledge on, more in the sense of this is actively not for me. This is actively telling me it's not for me. You know, in the same way that, because it's the kind of geekdom, and this runs right through Wade's character and everyone really in the book and in the film. It's not about loving the thing, it's about knowing every detail of the thing. It's about the only kind of true fandom being this kind of obnoxious show-off knowledge of every single detail. And that's not my way of approaching things. Even the stuff that I love and have seen a million times and can quote more or less backwards. And I have a lot of knowledge, but I don't want to recite the whole of War Games, you know, and I don't understand the person who would really on some level. So I find it quite alienating, I think, in that sense.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It's the tension of, do you universalize it or do you do fan service?
Right.
Which I think, if we go back and look at Marvel, I feel like, for the most part, they are doing a beautiful job of universalizing things.
Yeah.
And I think something like the J.J. Abrams' first Star Trek, did that brilliantly,
Oh,
because
yeah.
it actually gave the fans something that they could sink their teeth into, but was also an entryway for non-fans. And I think the film, that's why I say the film is better than the book here, because the film does have a few more ways in and a few more, it's not quite as concerned with, oh, well, I'll think you're fine that he actually did that on October 16th, not October 15th.
Right.
You know, it doesn't have any of that really aggressive show-offy trivia that the book does. So that's one of the reasons I like the film a lot more than the book.
Although that one scene about the Breakfast Club when he was talking to Sorrento,
Oh,
that was a little
yeah.
on the nose. He's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, I guess, I mean, that's such a part of his character, though, that maybe you can't really lose that,
Yeah.
you know. I suppose it has to be there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I like the book a lot more than the movie, but I don't fit the category either. Like, I'm familiar with all of these things, but I feel the same way, Helen. Like, I like stories, and I'm compelled by the stories. I'm not compelled by the minutia of detail in them. Like, that doesn't really matter to me
Yeah.
as much, you know.
Yeah,
Unless the
well
detail
put.
matters to the story, then I'm like, okay, great. But the one thing I found more fun about the book than the movie is, now this is going to sound crazy, but I'm a really big fan of escape rooms these days.
oh yeah.
Oh, right.
I just think escape rooms are super fun. I love like interacting with them and stuff. And the book felt like more of an escape room. It felt like it was like logically unlocking puzzles that would
Yeah,
get you to the next
okay.
stage. And in the film, it kind of, they don't have enough time to go through all of the puzzles that the book goes through. And so it wasn't so much like that he was able to recite war games from beginning to end, but how he got to figuring out how to recite war games from beginning to end was more interesting to me in the
Yeah.
book than it was in, you know, because in the movie you can't show the character's thoughts, and like, you know, he'll spend like 5
Yeah.
pages of a book thinking about what this could be, where in the movie he just looks at the camera and goes, "Oh, it's war games," and you're like, how did you get there, you know?
Yeah.
And I think they did a little better job in the book of like playing out. So you know, the details didn't matter to me as much. There's a couple of things in the book where it is the 3rd level of the 4th dungeon of Zork, you know, and you're like, I have no clue
Yeah.
where that is or
Yeah.
what that looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But at least the puzzling of getting to him figuring that out, I felt like was a little bit more robust than it was in the film.
Yeah, that's fair, and you're right. That's a function of time, I
Yeah,
suppose.
yeah.
Because problem solving on film is always quite difficult unless you're.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he made Indiana Jones though, who did a lot of puzzling.
That's true.
So
It's true.
I don't know.
You can do it well. I mean, you can do it well. I think
yeah.
like I was just finished the new Jack Ryan series.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, and I really
No
enjoyed
spoilers.
it.
No
No
spoilers. I'm
spoilers.
taking my
No
headphones out.
spoilers.
I'm
No,
just
you're good. I'm not gonna say it. But one thing I will say is there were several times where I'm like, wait, you're just gonna say that that's what's happening, and like you come up with a really advanced theory in
Yeah.
about 30 seconds. But I think you can do it in a fun way, and you just go with it because you're along for the ride, and then you can do it in a way that's like, okay, well that's not fun anymore because that's just way out of left field. And when you're dealing with geek material, and they don't give you all of the whys, and you're not in on the whys, then it
Yeah.
seems really like, okay, you just went way over my head. Like I have no clue what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's the danger. But I guess maybe that's the reason that they changed, you know, the second task to The Shining, which was pretty visually cool, and you kind of felt like that was Spielberg having quite a lot of fun, I think, with his old mates work. The one thing I did really miss was actually the idea that the first task is hidden on the school planet.
Oh yeah.
Because I really liked the idea that it was, you know, kids at an impoverished school who had the best chance of solving this entire puzzle. I thought that was a really lovely idea on Halliday's part, and so I felt like it was a shame that you kind of lost that, but you know, so be it.
Yeah, that's true. I also think that one of the things about the book that's a little bit more interesting than the movie is I think you get a little better perspective for the brute force of the IOI versus the like logical thinking of the individual Gunters, because all of the Gunters who are the puzzle solvers trying to figure out Halliday's puzzles, they have to go about it in a way that they're thinking about it as well as they possibly can, like the thought process. Now, to Helen's point, they get way too geeky with it where you just can't follow what they're doing. But where IOI will just show up and be like, okay, well, we're just going to dig this whole planet up looking for a gate, that like you would have had to find otherwise. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't have the resources that they have. So I do like that in the book too.
Well, I think we've done it.
I think yeah.
I think we've unpacked this movie very well.
Yeah.
Helen, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Give everybody a quick reminder again where they can find you online, where they can find Empire.
So yeah, it's empireonline.com, and it is on sale in Barnes & Noble. And I'm on Helen L. O'Hara at Twitter.
There you go.
Awesome.
Basically.
Awesome. I wish Barnes & Noble did a better job of stocking it, though, I have to say.
Oh yeah.
Because I go looking for it, and I'm at the point now. I think I'm just going to subscribe because it's just too hard to find it sometimes. But
and it is about 4 weeks behind sometimes.
Yeah.
So you're just kind of looking at it going, "Are this on the cover? Really? Gosh."
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Really nice to talk to you.
Well, that's it for today's show. Special thanks to Helen O'Hara for joining us today. Be sure and go check out what she's doing over at Empire. Obviously, we love Empire Magazine. We love the Empire podcast. And we've been blessed to have some conversations with those guys. So head on over there and check it out. Coming up next week on the Story Geeks podcast, as we said before, we will be diving into the concept of anti-heroes, which is inspired by Venom. So if you haven't seen Venom yet, head on out and do that. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of this stuff.
Yeah, and be sure to connect with us in the Story Geeks Facebook group, like I mentioned earlier. Love to hear your thoughts on Ready Player One or any of the stuff that we've been talking about. So head over to the Story Geeks Facebook group, posts, or respond to one of our posts that we've put up there. And also, don't forget the Aftercast. We're going to be talking about human consciousness and also a little bit about our favorite virtual worlds.
That's right. And if you enjoy all this stuff or anything else that we do on the Story Geeks podcast, please share it with a friend. Let somebody know about it. Help us spread the word. And you can find all the stuff that we've talked about today in the show notes.
Thanks for listening in. And as always, question everything in your favorite geek stories.
And always seek the truth.